to this computer. Hello and welcome everyone to this podcast, Diversity House podcast. Today I've got Fiona and we are going to talk about compassionate leadership. Fiona, thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here, Zina. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's start first by knowing who is Fiona. Tell us more about yourself, what you do, what are your hobbies, everything about yourself.
Oh my goodness. Well, let's not take up the whole podcast with me. I'll give you a tiny little snapshot. So I'm Fiona Meechan, and I have a passion for compassion. So I help ethical leaders to improve their impact in the world, and I do that through helping them to develop their compassion and competence as leaders, because that's what gets results. Compassionate leadership gets results. So I've worked in lots of different organizations over the years, and I started off I worked in various management roles and leadership roles in public sector. So I've worked in the NHS, I've worked in local government, I've worked in the police. I got, as I worked in more organizations, I got more and more curious about why people behave the way they do in organizations. And I've always been curious about human behavior because I actually started off as a criminologist. That's my first love. So I was really curious about why people choose to impact on each other. And then I could see that panning out in the workplace, and people, especially managers and leaders, having a real impact on the people that they manage and lead, not always positively. So I got very curious about that. Went off to study human resource management and organizational psychology and resilience. And then I was lucky enough to get a job at Manchester Business School teaching leadership. So I've done leadership, I've taught leadership, and I've studied it extensively, to the point where I completed my PhD looking at compassionate leadership and how we develop compassionate leaders. Because I just feel like that's what we really, really need. So what I do now is I still teach leadership a bit for Manchester Business School, and I also run my own private coaching and mentoring practice. So in addition to being a coach, like I said, I'm also a criminologist, which is which is a nice mix. And randomly, I'm also a ranch trained cowgirl. I just thought I'd throw that one in. I'm good at rounding people up to do things.
Yes, very interesting. I've seen your thesis and I've read some sections of it. It sounds really interesting. Compassionate leadership. So tell us more. What is it?
So, gosh, there's lots and lots of stuff out there written about compassionate leadership and compassionate work. I think sort of over the years it's evolved, and over the last maybe 10 to 15 years, there's been more and more and more research into this. People are getting more and more interested in it. And I just think there's more and more of a craving for it, a need for it in the world. Um, First of all, why compassion, I guess. So I'll just sort of clarify that. The reason I think compassion is so critical and why we need to bring it into the workplace is because if you look across so many different academic disciplines, psychology, sociology, religious history, philosophy, anthropology, archaeology, so many have all found that compassion is a really fundamental human trait. It's fundamental to all the world's religious, spiritual, and ethical traditions. And we know that people have been looking after each other since time began.
Mhm.
And so for me, compassion is a really fundamental human trait, and yet we don't really see it in work very often. So what's that about? So in trying to understand compassion, and reading all around compassion, I've been trying to figure out what it is. And so there's lots of different ways you can describe it. The way I would summarize it, which matches what lots of other people think, is that there's a bit of a process with compassion. And it
Mhm.
starts with noticing other people, noticing what's going on around about you, noticing if people are suffering, or just noticing where they are and what's going on for them. The next step is empathy. So being able
Mhm.
to empathize with people, being able to put yourself in their shoes, perhaps resonate with them, and seeking to understand what might be happening for them. And then the third step is taking action to improve their circumstances. So for me, there's a
Mhm.
bit of a compassion equation. You need to notice, empathize, and take action. And that gives you compassion. So compassionate leaders are really good at doing all of those things. They're really good at paying attention to what's going on around about them in work. They're really good at seeking to understand what's going on for the people that they work with. And they're really good at taking the right action. And what I mean when I say the right action is ethical action, values-led action in work. And I think a lot of people, when we talk about courage, compassion rather, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people think it's a bit pink and fluffy, and it's just about being nice to people all the
Mm-hmm.
time. Um, yes, we want you to be nice to people, of course we do. But actually, I think it's really important to emphasize that compassion demands us to be courageous as well. It's not easy to be compassionate, because the circumstances we find ourselves in work can be very tough.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and compassion demands that we challenge, it demands that we challenge bad behavior. And actually, lots of people don't want to do that. Lots of people really avoid that. And so you have to be brave and courageous to be a compassionate leader. Um, and then in addition to that, I always say you also have to be competent. There are core leadership actions and tasks that you have to be responsible for. Um, Things like decision making and managing risk and problem solving and developing your team and engaging staff. You have to have skills there as well, so you do have to have competence as well. So there's quite a lot involved in
Yeah.
compassionate leadership.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What I find surprising is that compassion or compassionate leadership involves challenging behavior. I was thinking compassionate could be nice, but that's something new for me to learn.
Yeah.
Fiona, why
Can
is
I
it?
just tell you a wee bit about that actually before we move on?
Yeah,
Because
please.
it just reminded me of a few years ago, I think it was 2020, just in COVID. I was lucky enough to be part of an online session with the actual Dalai Lama. So I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was organised by one of the staff associations in the Metropolitan Police. I don't know how they managed it. It was amazing. Got up at 5 in the morning, and there was the Dalai Lama on my computer screen live, talking to all of us over in the UK, and talking about policing and how do we balance that, being compassionate, being kind to people, but also having to do the job of challenging bad behaviour, which police have to do, which I think
Hmm.
we have to do in organisations as well. And it just made me chuckle a bit because he was quite passionate about it. And he said something along the lines of, when bad people are behaving badly, then it's okay to do whatever you have to do to stop them, whether you have to beat them with a stick or hit them. And I thought, oh, it was quite a strange thing to hear the Dalai Lama say, but it really aligned to my view, which is actually we have to hold in mind the greater good here. And if some people are causing distress and causing harm, we have to deal with them, because
Yeah,
to allow that to continue is not compassionate. The compassionate thing to do is to deal with that in service of the greater good. So that's why it's important to challenge bad behavior as well.
yeah.
So sorry to
And
interrupt you. I thought it
no,
was a
no,
wee story from the Dalai Lama. It's good enough for the Dalai Lama. It's good enough for
no.
the rest of us.
Fiona, tell us more about why is compassionate leadership important?
So lots of reasons, and I think fundamentally we've already touched on the first reason, which I think is the ethical part of it. Ethically, it's a fundamental human trait, and
Hmm.
we should demonstrate it in work as much as we demonstrate it outside of work as well. So ethically, it's the right thing to do. We know from research that we don't do well as human beings when we don't have compassion. We suffer when we don't have compassion. And so ethically, it's the right thing to do first and foremost. What I find really interesting is people often say to me, well, what's the business case for being compassionate? People who work in businesses, what's the business case for being compassionate? And I always find that really fascinating because nobody ever says, what's the business case for being a horrible bully in work? And yet
Yeah,
there are lots of horrible bullies in work. Nobody seems to need a business case for that. So for me, it's just obvious we should do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. However, you can also make a business case for it. And I think now is gosh, just the most important time to make that case.
mm,
Um, Sickness figures for workplaces in the UK are the highest they've been in 15 years. And I've been looking at it, a lot of people will be, of course, tracking it over time. And
What was
only
that?
the
Sickness?
sickness, yeah, sickness absence from work.
Yes. Yeah.
And the reason I raise that is because um, people are driven to go off work, not largely because, well, a huge part of that is due to mental ill health and stress that's caused by work. Not all of it, but it's a big chunk of it.
Hmm.
And a few years ago, the average number of days that a person would take sick from work was something like 5.8 days per year. And that was back in 2022. And then
Hmm.
2023, there was a report which said that had gone up to, I think, 7.8 days a year. And then it's just been reported this year in 2025, that's gone up again to 9.4 days per person per year
Oh.
off sick on average. And what that
Hmm.
amounts to is literally hundreds of millions of days sickness, 300 million days worth of sickness in a year in the UK, because of sickness absence from work. So it's gone
Mm.
up and up and up, and it's the highest level it's been in 15 years. Um, and that's due to a whole host of reasons. And over time, because of the system that we work um, in businesses, there's been a real focus on profit over people, performance over people, human beings being seen as very disposable and dispensable resources, human resources,
Hmm.
who we can lift and drop. And people have traditionally been treated actually really very badly in workplaces, with a real focus on numerical targets and a real dehumanization of people in the workplace. And of course, there's the wider context as well, which has got worse and worse since COVID, and lots and lots of years of austerity and now cost of living crisis, where people are struggling to cope financially and seeing big utilities companies and food companies making the biggest profits they've ever made, and seeing the wider stuff that's going on in the world, some of the horrors that are going on in the world. Life is really tough at the moment for
Yeah.
people, and all of that stuff combines. And for me, and the evidence tells us, compassion can be the antidote to that. Compassion can help people feel well again, and can help
Yeah.
people to go back into work. At the moment, we cannot sustain the levels of sickness and the amount of increase in the sickness levels that we've got going on. So there's a really strong ethical case for being compassionate. And there's also a really strong business case for being compassionate, because when you have lots of sickness, it literally costs businesses lots of money. We also have lots and lots of turnover. So people leave organizations when they have bad bosses. It's
Mm.
really that it always costs organizations when that happens, because it costs them in terms of lost productivity, it costs them to re-employ people. So there are real business costs to a lack of compassion, which is why I say we definitely need more compassionate approaches in business.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Let's look at now what happens when we don't have compassionate leaders. And if we talk about it through examples, that would be great.
Yeah, so gosh, I mean, there's virtually every single person you speak to will be able to give you an example of
Yeah.
a lack of compassion in leadership without a shadow of a doubt. Um, I can think of lots of stories that people tell me every day. So somebody, for example, who, well, I know a few people who work in universities, for example.
Hmm.
Um, Again, those ways of working are endemic in universities, the same as they are in other organisations. Um, and people are being put under huge amounts of pressure at the minute. And where you have managers, so I know at least two people who have got managers who are putting extra pressure, just loading extra pressure onto these people, and not taking any account of their personal circumstances whatsoever, and treating them as very disposable people.
Hmm.
If you're not here, we'll just get somebody else in. And all that happens is when you dehumanize people, I can think of individuals
Yeah.
who start to feel ill because they don't feel heard, they don't feel seen, they don't feel valued. When people start to feel ill, they they cannot work as well when they're not as well.
Yeah.
They withdraw discretionary effort, they're more likely to go off sick, all of those things. Um, I've got my own examples of, working for leaders who,
Yeah.
um, one person I used to work for a while ago was dreadful. That person actually reveled in making staff cry, and in lying about people. Was actually quite cruel to people, and of course they were deeply unpopular, and people would leave as soon as they could. So again, it's creating a cost for that organization, and there are loads of examples you can see in the media of when that's happening, when there's a lack of compassion in organizations.
Mm.
Um, Lots of examples. For example, recently, the Confederation of British Industries, the RAF, financial services industries in the city. There's been lots of reports recently about a real lack of compassion in those organisations, leading to terrible bullying, harassment, even crimes being committed in work, and those things having a really bad impact on not only the individuals in the workplace,
Mm-hmm.
but also financial implications for the business as well. I mean, to be fair, there's a list as long as your arm, really, of when people have been treated badly, when there's a lack of compassion in work. I could
Yeah.
talk to you about that all day and all night, but I won't. It's a bit depressing if I'm honest.
Yes.
So there's many awful, awful stories, and that's what drives me to keep sort of banging the drum, if you like, because I hear so many dreadful stories all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think? Why we don't have compassionate leadership?
So I think there's a range of things really, and it goes back to some of the stuff I talked about before, um, where we've traditionally had for a
Mm.
long time this ongoing dehumanization of people in work. So we have these cultures which are focused more on numbers than quality, more on profits than people. Um, and so you get these really negative cultures. And I think coupled on top of that, that the bigger problem, if you like, is that we have a real lack of leadership development in this country. And it's not just in this country, actually, it's a global problem, I think,
Mm.
where people think that they have to act in a certain way when they're in a leadership position, and the way that they act kind of conforms to that old school way of being in an organization. I'm too busy to care. It's all about the numbers. Pipe down and be quiet. If you don't like it here, go and work somewhere else. All of that kind of stuff. And people don't know better because they've never been developed better. So what often happens in organizations is you will get somebody who is perhaps good technically at their job. So you
Mm.
might get somebody who's perhaps a good accountant. They get promoted to be the manager. Or you get somebody who's maybe a good lawyer. They get
Mm.
promoted to be a manager. Somebody
Mm-hmm.
who's a good engineer, they get promoted to be the manager. But actually, management and leadership is a completely different skill. Completely
Yes.
different skill. And there's no recognition of that. And so what we find is that there are loads of people in organizations all over the country, all over the world, who are suddenly in charge of managing and leading teams of people with no idea how to do it. And all they've got to learn from is the people who've gone before, who
Mm-hmm.
have all been embedded in those kinds of negative cultures that we've had. And so occasionally you will get, there are pockets of good practice, aren't there? You will get pockets of practice where people will naturally go, hang on a minute, I need to draw on my human skills here. I need to be a decent human being in work. But not everybody does that, and lots of people end up kind of bumbling through. Something like the CMI did a study a couple of years ago, and they found something like 82% of people in management roles have had no management training.
Mm.
80%. I mean, that's phenomenal.
Wow.
So it's no
Yes.
wonder really that people are kind of bumbling through and don't really know if they're doing it right or not. Um, and the people who are passionate about getting it right will go out and seek out their own leadership development. But not everybody does that. Not everybody does that. And so we end up with a lot of people sadly doing it really quite badly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we end up with this lack of compassion because people are using very old school management techniques still that don't work, which are actually causing quite a lot of harm. And there's loads of evidence to show that your relationship with your line manager is is probably the most important relationship in work.
Yeah.
Sometimes in life, your manager often has a bigger impact on your well-being even than your partner or your GP, for example. I mean,
Yeah, that's true.
it's really powerful. It's
Yeah.
really powerful, and therefore it can be an amazing force for good if you've got a great manager, but it can also be extremely damaging if you've got somebody who's not doing it well,
Mm,
often because they don't know how to. Um, I mean, there's again, I could go on and on. It's quite a complex picture actually, because we also find there's research to show that a lot of people who get into management positions have or people who want to be managers and leaders sometimes have this kind of social dominance approach, which is that they think they have a right to dominate other people. They think they believe they are better than other people. And
mm,
studies show that they are less willing, sometimes less able to empathize with other people. And therefore, if you don't have empathy, you're not going to have compassion. So
mm.
this all that playing into it as well. And then on top of that, um, when we're under stress, our
Yeah.
empathy is also affected. So we know we've got lots of people under stress at the minute. There was a study recently which showed that something like 98% of all managers are experiencing stress at work.
Yeah.
98%, virtually everybody, isn't it?
Yeah.
We are under stress. Our empathy erodes, and we're less able to demonstrate empathy towards other people. So there's lots and lots of layers to this problem, um, which means that it might not be that easy to solve, but
Yeah.
we can do things. There are things happily we can do things to improve the situation.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly we can do things. So, yeah, okay. In relation to this, we can do things to improve compassionate leadership. How do we bring compassionate leadership to workplace?
So there are lots of different ways we can do it actually, which is really optimistic. This is my favorite bit to talk about because
Oh, nice.
it gets so depressing, doesn't it, to talk about the
Yeah.
the bad picture. Um, we know that when people are treated well, people will do better in organizations. Okay, so that's a very overarching statement, and we'll come on
Mm,
to some specifics. Um, but just to give you a couple of examples. So I've got a good friend who started work many years ago with a big financial services company. And
hmm
very soon after she started, she had a horrendous bereavement of somebody very close to her in awful circumstances. So she had to go off for a while. Um, Now, if you just started in a new job, understandably, she was really worried about that. That company were fabulous with her. They were fabulous with her. They really supported her. They didn't put any pressure on her to come back quickly, even though she'd only just started. And they really looked after her and they showed her that they cared. They sent flowers and cards.
mm,
Um, and she stayed with them for nearly 20 years now. And in that time, she's also had a period of illness. And again, they looked after her really well. They supported her. What happens is when people feel looked after, they are more
yeah.
loyal. They will stay with you. And she's done great work for that organization. She's worked up through the ranks. She's really dedicated. She goes over and above. Um, and we know from loads of research that this happens consistently. So when you treat people well generally, they will return that. They will be more committed to the organization. They will be less likely to leave the organization. They will be more productive. They will have better well-being, which makes they're
Yeah.
more able to be productive. Um, there's some really interesting research in relation to what happens in the case of more extreme circumstances. If places have been through disasters, for example. So there were studies around what happened around the 9/11 attacks on the Twin Towers in America.
hmm
And in 2011, there was flooding in the central business district in Brisbane in Australia,
hmm
studies there as well, and then more recently studies during the COVID-19 pandemic. And what they all found was those organizations who treated people well, who showed people that actually their humanity was more important than profit, and they were going to look after people, and they kept in touch with people, and they checked in on people to see how they were after the event. Those companies that did that, that treated people well, were rewarded tenfold and more, because when people were able to come back to work, they were more loyal to the
Mm-hmm.
organization, had more psychological connection to the organization and to their colleagues, so better teamwork. Um, and actually, interestingly, more productive than before the event. So if you build compassion in peacetime, it pays back in times of crisis. So lots of ways to do that happily.
Good,
Um,
yeah.
um, it's good to build in. If you think about it in terms of the life cycle of an employee in an organization,
Mm-hmm.
there are ways that you can build compassion in throughout that whole life cycle. What it takes is intention. And I think that's really critical. We have to do this with intent. We have to say, actually, we're going to be a compassionate organization. And that's what we're going to value in this organization. So it starts with developing the vision and the values for your organization. Do you have compassion as a core value for your organization? And
Mm,
that's a core starting point. Then, if you think about the start of the life cycle of an employee, you can start with values-based recruitment. So you can say very clearly the people we want to work in this organization are people who are compassionate, who will look after each other. Yeah. So that's
yeah.
the start. You can reinforce that when it comes to bringing people into the organization. So induction processes, you can reinforce expectations of people, of behaviors that you want from people. Then you can build it into performance management processes. So when you're setting objectives for people and setting goals for your organization, for teams, for individuals, you can make sure that compassion is built into that. And it's built into your regular one-to-ones with people, how you support people, how you check in on their well-being to make sure that they are able to deliver what you want them to deliver. So
Mm,
supporting people and developing people, as well as, helping them to deliver the things you need them to deliver. You can reward and recognize the best behaviors that deliver compassion. So there's lots and lots of things that people can do in organizations to reward compassion and be very clear that this is what we want in the organization.
mm,
I think one of the biggest things organizations can do is develop their leaders.
yeah.
Yeah. So as we said before, one of the biggest problems we have is that we don't develop our leaders. We just
No.
let them glide through life, making it up as they go along. And actually, what we need to do is start to come at leadership development with a bit of intent, and really clarifying what that means in terms of what do we expect from you as a leader in terms of your behaviors, which is about looking out for people, noticing what's going on, listening to people, supporting as well as challenging, developing people, all of those amazing things, being visible for your staff, being approachable to staff, creating psychological safety in the organization.
Mm,
All of those things. So, because leaders have such a huge impact on the culture of organizations. So, it's all very well saying, if we come right back full circle to the start, it's all very well saying we have compassion as a value for this organization. But if
yeah.
the leader is living that as a value, then it's pointless. You've got to have congruence. If you're going to have a value, the behavior's got to reflect that. Otherwise, people just don't buy into it and they won't believe it. So leadership development for me is absolutely critical.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think actually a critical thing to do with leadership development as well is, we talk a lot about the practical things leaders can do. If we
Hmm.
take a step back from the practical things that leaders can do in work, I just wanted to say a little bit about the importance of self-compassion as well, if that's okay.
Yes,
Because
that's
actually,
very,
yeah, self-compassion is a really strong starting point. It's the whole you go onto an aircraft if you're going
Hmm.
anywhere, going on holiday, and they do the airline safety briefing and they drop down the oxygen mask. Yeah.
Yeah,
What do they say to you in the airline safety briefing about the oxygen mask?
yeah,
They say, fit your own mask before helping other people.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's because if you can't breathe, you can't help other people, you
No.
know? And so, actually, for me and many others as well who've done lots of research on this, um, it starts with self-compassion. If leaders
Certainly.
encourage leaders to look after themselves really well, they're more likely to be able to look after other people well. If they can demonstrate compassion towards themselves, they're more likely to be able to demonstrate compassion towards others. So I just think that is critically important. And then also, in addition to that, I think building self-awareness as a leader
Hmm.
really important as well. So that's things like emotional intelligence, really understanding the impact that you have on other people and being able to manage your own emotions, and really understanding that and bringing that to the table is critical as well as then doing all this stuff about being visible, being approachable, listening, and building compassion into decision making and problem solving. So there's a big job to do, but I think we
Yes.
have clarity about how we can do it, which I think gives us hope.
Certainly, yes. And thank you very much for emphasizing the importance of being self-compassionate and
Yeah,
self-awareness.
yeah,
Yeah, you
really.
can, as they say, you cannot pour from an empty cup. So you really, yes, you
Yeah.
really need to take care of yourself first so that you will be able to notice the people around you and then, yeah, treat them well. I think that's a very, very critical point.
It really is. And if I may just say a little bit more about
Yeah,
the self-compassion,
of
actually.
course,
Um,
yes.
Thank you. So Kristen Neff in the US, Dr. Kristen Neff has studied self-compassion quite extensively, and she talks about there being three main aspects of self-compassion. And one of those is common humanity. And it's that understanding that we're all in this together. And that really resonates with sort of the fundamental principle of compassion generally, which is that all life is of equal value. Everybody is deserving of compassion. Everybody, including ourselves, which is why
Yeah,
self-compassion comes into it. But that sense of you're never alone, we're all in this together. We will all make mistakes, we'll all have disappointments, but we get through it by supporting one another. Common
yeah,
humanity is really important, and social connection, we know, is one of the most important things for our health and well-being. So just really appreciating people, is fundamental to self-compassion for us and for compassion for other people. So common humanity is one thing. There are three of them. The second one is self-kindness. So
hmm,
being conscious about how you speak to yourself, and adopting more of a warm approach to how you speak to yourself and how you deal with yourself. And I would add to that, some of the physical things as well, being kind to yourself in terms of being mindful about your nutrition and your exercise and your sleep and rest, and really focusing on all of those things. These are not nice to haves, these are essential. And if you want to be a good quality, compassionate leader, you have to start with looking after yourself well.
yeah,
So, common humanity, self kindness, and the third one is mindfulness.
hmm,
What that is about um, being really mindful of your thoughts and your feelings and how you behave towards others, and not suppressing those things, but also not exaggerating those things and not holding on to those things. And mindfulness is one of the best practices really for being an effective leader.
mm,
If you want to be able to regulate your emotions, if you want to be better at decision making, if you want to be more creative, if you want to be better at problem solving, all these amazing things that we need leaders to be, mindfulness is a really great way to keep our brains in check, and to help us to be the best leaders that we can be for other people. So it was a
yeah.
little bit of a long lecture about self-compassion, but you might guess that I'm really passionate about self-compassion as well. We need to start there.
Yeah. How do you think leaders can practice mindfulness?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. I've actually, and you didn't know this, I didn't even prime you for this. I've actually got a little, I've got a free workbook that we can give people a link to if you want
Oh,
to,
yeah.
which is about, it's a series of 5-minute exercises that leaders can try to help them calm their brains. And it's literally about, mindfulness is about sort of getting out of your head. Yeah.
Hmm.
So one of the easiest things to do if you are feeling a bit frazzled and a bit stressed, one of the easiest things to do is just breathe. Okay. I know
Hmm.
it's simple. Um, I've got a little 3-step process that I really like because there's lots and lots of things we can do. Um, so I'll tell you about the 3-step process, and then also we can give people the link if they want to get the little workbook
Yeah.
as well. Try that. So I like to call it Breathe, Pray, Love. So you probably have you heard of the book Eat, Pray, Love in the film?
Yes.
Yeah, well, you can remember if we say breathe, pray, love. So the start for me is just breathing. So there's a breathing technique called the 478 technique, which
Yeah.
was devised by Dr. Andrew Weil in the US. And that's literally breathe in for a count of 4 and breathe right into the bottom of your lungs and fill your lungs right up for a count of 4. Hold it for a count of 7 and then breathe out fully for a count of 8. So really squeeze your lungs and breathe out.
Hmm.
Do that a few times, and what that does is send signals to your brain to just calm. We're okay, we're safe, all is well, we can calm down. And by focusing on your breathing, you're getting out of that craziness that's going on in your head,
Yeah.
and you start to get mindful. So that's the first one, that's breathe. The pray bit is literally just putting your hands in the pray position and pushing your hands together. And there's something about that which activates pressure sensors, which again, and don't ask me how it works scientifically, I don't know. Apparently, it sends signals to your brain, which sets off brain waves, which tells your brain we're safe, we're okay. Okay, so breathe, pray, and then the third one, the love one, is you can give yourself a little cuddle.
Yeah.
And if you hold yourself again, it's just setting off those pressure sensors and really focus on the feeling of your hands, the feeling of your arms, getting out of your head, getting into your feelings, and just holding yourself for a couple of minutes. And those are things that can just really help to calm your brain in the moment. And these are all mindful practices. Anything that connects you to your senses. So focusing on what you can see, what you can hear, what you can smell, what you can
Hmm.
touch, all of those things. All of that helps you get out of your head and helps your brain to calm down. So breathe, pray, love. You can do those 3 exercises really quickly. And we can give people a link to the mindfulness workbook as well, which will
Yes.
help. I'm glad to be able
Yes.
to give you that, actually. That's nice.
Yeah. Recently, also, I was watching a podcast, I think by Jefferson Fisher, and he spoke about the importance of silence and pause before.
That's perfect. It sounds
Yeah.
so simple, doesn't it? But it
Hmm.
actually takes a lot of practice. Yeah, but before you respond, and I think this happens such a lot in work, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I've seen it happen. Um, I've previously looked after lots of operational services, which are quite frontline and fast moving, and things like community wardens. I've managed community wardens. I've managed bin collection services. I've managed street cleansing services. I've looked after lots of sort of frontline services, and it can be very fast paced. And when you're working in that environment, people just react really quickly,
Yeah.
and things can get very tense very quickly because
Mhm.
people don't stop to choose a response. We just respond from a place of panic and stress and do. And that can create so many problems. Just that,
True.
what you've just said there is perfect. Just take a moment, take a breath,
Hmm.
take a moment,
Yeah.
buys you a tiny bit of time, enough time to choose a better response than you might otherwise
Exactly.
have done without thinking.
To choose
Yeah.
your words and the
Yeah.
impact of your words on the others.
Yes, absolutely. because because the impact is real. When you are harsh with other people, in the same way as when you're harsh with yourself,
Yeah.
you know your body responds to that. Your body goes into a stress response because it feels threatened. And then you get flooded with adrenaline and cortisol and does all sorts of nasty things to your body if that's happening a lot. So you want to speak well to yourself, but also it's really important to speak well to other people because when you don't, you can do a lot of damage. So that's a great point. Yeah, take a breath,
Yeah.
choose your response. It's really simple. I think one of the things I love about compassion is that another sort of fundamental principle is that small things can make a big difference,
Yeah.
which makes it really, really achievable. And I love that because again, it gives us hope, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Small things like take a breath before you respond can make a massive difference to your day and to the other person's day as well. Um, and things like that have a ripple effect. You know, when you choose to speak to people kindly, when you choose to deal with people rationally and
Yeah.
compassionately instead of harshly, those little things have a ripple effect. So it makes you feel better, it makes the other person feel better. And actually, people witnessing that are therefore also more likely to behave in the same way. So in that way, you can change cultures as well with very
Hmm.
small day-to-day actions. You can that can ripple out in an organization. You can change culture that way too. So small things can make a big difference.
Yeah. And thank you for mentioning culture of organizations. Do you want to
Yeah.
talk about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think it's impacted by a lot of the things that we've talked about.
Yeah.
Great work actually, just to illustrates this really well is work of Christine Porath. I think she's Georgetown University in America, and she's done some great work on incivility at work.
Hmm.
And she talks about that ripple effect as well, how people who who don't take a second to take a breath before they speak to people, people who speak to other people harshly, or who are rude to other people, or who are dismissive of other people, that that can ripple out like an infection in an organization. It really can change the culture in an organization. And often people who are not skilled leaders, who haven't had leadership development, who are acting in that way all the time, are impacting on the culture like that all the time.
Mm.
And how leaders act and what the behavior that leaders model ripples out so quickly. And so leaders have a choice. They can choose to ripple out that incivility, or they can make a better choice and they can choose to ripple out compassion and make that contagious. And so you can have that impact on culture by making some really conscious choices um, in terms of your behavior. And then you can back that up with all the things that I talked about before when you look at the employee life cycle. So putting in place all your policies and your processes and your guidance, your reward and recognition, your training, you can put all those things in place as well and make sure your behavior aligns to that. And those are the kinds of things that can really impact on the culture, choosing to behave in a compassionate way. And I
Mm.
have to say, actively challenging bad behavior. It's really critical because if you let that go, that will become the culture. So you have to
Yeah.
act challenge that. So that again comes full circle back to why it's important to be really courageous and strong as a compassionate leader because you have to step up to the plate and challenge the bad behavior.
Mm. Tell us more. I want to learn more about challenging bad behavior by compassionate leaders.
Yeah. Wow, gosh. So yeah,
I
so I
know we
think
did
again,
not plan for this, but
yeah, no,
this,
it's a great question. So
yeah.
do you mean how you challenge bad behavior or what do you mean?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
How
Okay.
compassionate leaders challenge bad behaviors.
Yeah. So, so again, we need to develop people because these are real skills we're talking about here. It's not
Yeah.
easy. It's not easy, and we know that in even in day-to-day life. You know, when somebody behaves badly towards us, our initial reaction often is to, come out defensively or aggressively or, fight, flight, freeze. We might run away. We might not deal with
Mm-hmm.
it. And in my own research, I found so I researched. I spoke to senior leaders in policing for my own research, and lots of them said to me, ironically, it's the police, their whole job is about challenging bad behavior in society, isn't it? It's about,
Yeah.
it's about arresting the bad people and stopping bad people doing bad things. So you would think they would be great at it, but not within organizations. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's It's weird. But there are so many people who just will not challenge bad behavior. And we've seen it, haven't we? There's just been some horrific cases in the news about people behaving badly in the police, and it happens in other organizations as well, not just the police. Um, and the people that I spoke to in my research were really dumbfounded by this because I found a lot of people wanted to be compassionate,
Mm,
um, but were really constrained by the culture. But what I found consistently was um, people did challenge bad behavior and found out that some people had been behaving badly for many, many, many years and had never been challenged. So they didn't even know what they were doing was wrong, which seems odd, but that's the truth of it. They didn't even know that it was wrong. But I think the fundamental way to go about it is to do it in a very objective way. We can take the emotion out of it and we can be very objective and we can say, when you behave like this, the impact is this,
mm-hmm,
and that's not acceptable. Therefore, in the future, we need this kind of behavior instead. And we can, we don't have to be emotional. We don't have to shout and scream. None of that has to happen. We can always, and we should always maintain dignity and respect in work for whoever you're dealing with. But you
mm-hmm,
can address bad behavior in a very objective way. And we must. We must. And part of that comes back to, again, to the start about generating that self-awareness, being really clear about what our own values are
mm-hmm,
and aligning those to the organizational values. And you therefore have that backup. So if somebody is acting in a way, if you have an organizational value of compassion and somebody is acting in a way which is not compassionate towards other people, then you have that as a tool in your toolkit. You can say, this organization expects you to behave in this way. When you did that, that wasn't compassionate. It's not
mm-hmm.
acceptable. What we need in the future is this, being really clear. And then if they keep breaching it, then then you're down a disciplinary process. There are processes you can use to get rid of people who will not change because you don't want them in your organization because of that ripple effect. They can poison a whole organization. So, so there are ways you can go about challenging people. Maintain dignity and respect, be
Yeah.
objective, be really clear about what the problem behavior is, and be really clear about what you expect instead. And that's doing it in a compassionate way to that person and to everybody else round about them. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it does. It does perfectly make sense. Yeah. We spoke about compassionate leaders. Do you have anything to talk about the relationship between compassionate leaders and employees? That,
Yeah, so um I suppose it's back to that point about
yeah.
the leader can have such a huge impact on an employee.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said before, your leader has more, your line manager rather has a bigger impact on your well-being than your partner or your GP. They're a
Mm-hmm.
huge part of your life, aren't they?
True,
And
yeah. Because you're spending more time with the people you work with.
absolutely, you're in work such a long time, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
And it can be the difference between wanting to go to work and wanting to just run away. And even the impact can be really, really massive. Um, and again, I think we've all got stories of people who've just been awful. Like I said, I've come across it. Um, I've come across it personally with a manager, for example, who, I've been in an office with a team and we'd be having a good laugh about something, and this manager would come in and tell us to stop laughing because we needed to be more serious in work. And you think, you only live once, you should be able to have fun. Not least also because we know that from the research, if people are happy in work, they will be more productive in work.
Yeah.
But when people are like that, when they are miserable like that, and they don't want people to be happy, or that person who I'm thinking of who actively was happy making employees cry, nobody respects them. People don't want to do their best for them.
Mm-hmm.
People become unwell, so they can't do their best, but then they also withdraw discretionary effort because they think, well, why should I go the extra mile for you? So that relationship is really, really important. And sometimes it can be very subtle as well. So as a leader, you need to be really, really acutely aware of how you are
Mm-hmm.
being with people. Um, if you want people to tell you what's going on in the organization, if you want people to tell you what's not going so well and to give you the good ideas about how you can make it better, you have to be able to receive feedback from people in a really positive way. And even the smallest reactions can turn people off. So Professor Megan Wrights at Hult's Business School's done some amazing work on speaking up in organizations and the role of
Yeah.
leaders. Leaders often think that they're great at listening to people, whereas the reality is that they're often not. And even the smallest responses, if somebody says something you don't like and you pull a face, go, people will not tell you again.
Yeah.
As a leader, you have to be so conscious of that relationship between you and the staff in order to keep that really positive. And that's again where that self-awareness comes in, why it's so important, because it has such an impact on your one-to-one relationships and then also on the wider culture of the organization through that ripple effect as well. Is that
Yeah.
what you said when you talked about?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. I know I've been asking questions, but now let me pause and let you talk about anything that you want to talk about in relation to compassionate leaders. Maybe there is something that you want to talk about and I did not ask.
No, actually, I think we've covered loads, which has been great. So thank you for asking all those questions. I think it's been brilliant. I think uh, the two things that I want to leave people with, I suppose, sort of two
Yeah.
key messages. Um, and it's just reinforcing what we've already said, really.
Mm.
The first one is that compassion is fundamental to human nature, and it can be a real antidote in this world. So where we are surrounded by there's if you just have to watch the news, don't you? And you can see leadership which is cruel, divisive, hateful, um, all of that, and we see that on the global stage. We see it in organizations as well. Compassion can be the antidote to that, and I think that gives us
Yeah.
real hope. And because it's fundamental human nature, we've got it in us. We just need to tap into it, and we need to embrace it and really, really live it. People crave it and there's a real appetite for it. Every time I talk about compassionate leadership, people are like, oh, we need that right now.
Yeah.
People really need it. So I think there's a market for compassionate leadership, if you like. So that's the first thing. It's fundamental and all life is of equal value and everybody deserves compassion. The second thing, is just to reinforce that point that it is really achievable. It's really doable. You can demonstrate compassion in the smallest acts, and the smallest acts can have the biggest difference. And I think if we embrace that and if we start small, we can really build compassionate cultures, but we have to do it with intention. But again, small actions, big difference. So let's get on and let's take those small actions on a daily basis. It's really achievable.
Yeah, thank you so much. Indeed, it is really achievable. Thank you so much, Fiona, for sharing your time with us
Oh,
and
it's a
your
real
knowledge.
pleasure.
I've learned a lot about compassionate leadership. Yeah, and I'm so, so happy that I invited you for this podcast because this topic is very, very crucial, and every organization needs, yeah, to develop compassionate leadership.
Mm.
So yeah, thank you once again.
It's a real
Yeah,
pleasure. The more we can get the message out, the better. You can tell I get really evangelical about it. So thank you so much for asking me to talk about it. I really, really appreciate that, Zina. Thank you.
thank you.